Hello, and welcome to the GBC Productions channel. This is episode 55. In this video, I will be taking apart a Super Nintendo, also known as the SNES. In the previous video, we looked at the original Nintendo, which is an 8-bit system. This is a 16-bit system. We'll also be looking inside the controller. This one is an actual Nintendo controller, unlike the previous controller, which was an aftermarket controller. We'll also take a look inside of a game cartridge. As you can see, it's a top loader, unlike the original Nintendo, which is a front loader. So I'm going to disconnect everything here, set it aside, and let's take it apart. Before I take the screws out, let's take a look around this thing and see the connector ports on it. On the front here, we can see one of the two controller ports. On the bottom here, there is an expansion port. There's even screw holes to mount whatever would go on the bottom. I'm not aware of anything that was made for it. Here we have the composite AV connection. It looks kind of like HDMI, but it's not. This is a standard RF connector and the power connector. The screws here are the larger version of what we saw on the game cartridge in the previous video. So now we'll just start taking the screws out. There appears to be 6 screws holding this cover on. And we're in. There's a cable underneath the eject mechanism that I gotta disconnect here. It probably would be easier if I just took the eject mechanism out. I'll remove this shaft, it should lift right out. There we go. So I'm going to start by disconnecting this ribbon cable here, and then we'll take a look at the circuit boards in this upper half of the casing. So this board is just going to contain the connectors for the controllers and the power light. There is nothing else on the board, no components. It's just the connectors and the LED, power LED, and then they go to that ribbon cable and down to the main board. There's no reason to take it apart any further than that. So now let's get back into the main board. I'm just going to move all my screws onto a magnetic pad along with the spring for the eject mechanism. Alright, so all the way over here is a power switch, which is run directly from the big plastic slider. So I'm going to disconnect the power switch, and then we're going to probably take it out of here to get it out of the way. Real quick, I want to point out where those screw holes on the bottom that would mount something, they actually have some decent hardware. They must have had something in mind. Whether they actually built something, I don't know. I'm not aware of anything, at least in the US, that has it. Here's the cartridge connector. And the switch is out, and we'll set it aside. Here's the reset button. Now I'm going to take this RF shield off. Let's see a date on here of 1995. I've got to be careful taking this RF shield off because it's also being used as a heat sink. So before I take that off, I'm going to actually take the board completely out. It can't be all the screws. Let's see if I can lift it out. Nope. There must be more. Here we can see how this RF shield is being used as a heat sink. I think if I'm really careful, I can take this RF shield off. Surprisingly, I don't see any heatsink compound oozing out. So I'm going to go for it so we can get a better look. Now this should lift right off, and there's no heatsink compound on there. Now I'll move the screws aside again. Here's the RF modulator in its own little can. Interestingly enough, some of these chips say Nintendo Sony. Some of them just say Nintendo. And all the rest just seem to say Nintendo. This here looks like a fuse. Back on the Sony Nintendo thing, I do know that Sony and Nintendo were working together at one point for the original PlayStation. And all those plans ended up falling through. Anyway, let me see if I can get the top off of this RF can for the RF modulator. I'll try to get this off camera. It popped right off. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit. I'm not going to take this module any further apart because you have to desolder everything. So that's what's inside the Super Nintendo. Now let's look inside the controller and the game cartridge. Alright, I've reorganized, resituated, and we're going to start with looking inside the controller. Here's what the connector looks like. This is an official Nintendo controller. I don't know if it's original or not. And we'll take the back off. Now this controller has a few more buttons than the original controller, obviously. And we're going to take a look at those. There are a couple on the back of the controller. First, here is the directional controller. Select and start the A-B buttons. We also have the X-Y buttons and the right and left buttons on the back. If I take the pin out, the button should lift out. Here's what I just removed. And that pushes a pad like this. Same type of rubber membrane like a remote control. Now I'll pull the circuit board out. And these are the rubber membranes with the conductive material on them. For the start and select, the ABXY, and then here's the plastic piece that runs a directional controller. There's a connector for the cable. I'm not going to disconnect it. Here's the directional controller membrane. And here's the conductive pads that the conductive rubber makes contact with. And a close-up of the chip that's on the board. I see a date of 97. Maybe this isn't an original controller, but it is a Nintendo controller. So that's it for the controller. Let's put this aside and let's take a look inside the game cartridge. This will use the same screwdriver that was used on the cartridge for the original Nintendo. And it should just lift apart. It's interesting, just like on the original Nintendo cartridge, how much empty space there is, though there's a lot less in this one. Here's a close-up of the board. This one is dated 1990. We'll take a quick look at the back side. There's not much to these cartridges, so there we go. Don't forget to subscribe for more, mash that like button, and comment below. Until next time, this is Uncle D from GBC Productions, signing off.